Hello, my loves, and welcome back to Strange Playgrounds, episode something, 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 something. And welcome back to yet another random rumination on the nature of imagination and fiction and mythology and all things abstract. I mean, really, what I was having this very odd experience at the moment, ladies and gentlemen. I'm having this very odd experience. It's something that used to happen quite a lot when I was younger, whereby I'm having very strong recollections of images and sounds and music from when I was a child. Things like the soundtracks from particular cartoon shows and video games are recurring very, 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 very strongly at the moment, and I don't know what's triggering them. I'm perpetually fascinated by the mechanisms of memory and mind and how those abstractions come about. It's not just the neurological mechanisms that fascinate me, it's the abstract ones. It's not necessarily the brain, although I find that fascinating too. On a somewhat lesser level, it's the mind, which is the abstract of those functions, and how that refers to itself, how the mechanisms within that abstraction function, and whether they can ever be assessed to any great degree. Because I would posit that, or hypothesize that the way these mechanisms form are entirely idiosyncratic for each individual, so the very notion of analysis becomes problematic, because they cannot be perceived, they cannot be defined, and even if they could, they would make very little sense to anyone who is outside of that experience, yeah? It's not as though you can crack open someone's skull and stare into the phenomena of mind. You just can't do it. Maybe at some point there will be, in some sort of transhumanist day after the day after tomorrow, there may be a means of doing that. It would be fascinating if we could ever get that off the ground. Can you imagine what it would be like linking mind to mind with another human being, such that the definitions and parameters of personality start to dissolve, and the definitions between self start to dissolve, so that you can perceive what they consider to be their memories and their experiences as though they are your own, and then you suddenly can't determine where you end and they begin. That's fascinating, because that experience would transform everything. It would the very experience of it would dissolve everything you know of yourself. It would necessarily transform you. Your assumptions and parameters of self would dissolve around you. I don't know what that would be like. It would be amazing to experience. And can you imagine if you took that further? Could you imagine if maybe there was some popularly available technology that allowed you to link more than one mind together? So that suddenly parameters between the notion of the individual human being starts to dissolve. It becomes a nonsense. Can you imagine that? And what would be the result if that escalated, if more and more and more people started to link into this creation? What would be the result? Something very legitimately divine, I would say, or maybe legitimately infernal, something that's mad, something like Azathoth, perhaps. There is something very Lovecraftian about it. The potential for there to be something, the closest we can come to a kind of divinity, but it being mad and dribbling and lunatic, rather than transcendent, or maybe both, who knows. It's a fascinating concept to play with, and it wasn't at all what I intended to talk about here, but there we go. No. But yeah, I've been having this experience whereby very, very keen, or almost auditory hallucinations have been occurring, where I've almost physically heard music from the incidental music from the Ghostbusters cartoon has been happening a lot, and from Visionaries, and from do you remember the old Ewoks cartoon? Which is actually, having gone back and watched it for the first time since I was like 5, it's actually a lot better than it has any right to be, just being a Star Wars spin-off about these cutesy bear aliens. It's quite good. But yeah, I don't know why those things are recurring. I don't know what triggered them. I don't know what set of circumstances has brought them back to the foreground. And I find that fascinating, that confusion to be fascinating. It leads me to believe that there is some sort of subconscious association going on, that something external, some set of circumstances, some image or emotional experience has triggered their resurgence for whatever reason, and it may not be that clearly defined. For me, from what I can discern of my own experience of mind, it is not a clean-cut thing, and anyone who tries to reduce it to being clean-cut just doesn't understand it, or is trying to present a cartoon caricature of it. It's why I have problems in fiction with very simplistic Freudian motivations. Almost if you look in popular cinema, or certainly every sort of villainous character, every serial killer, every psychopath, every supervillain, they, like your Hans Gruber types, they have these incredible Freudian motivations that are completely simplistic. And I mean, in the case of Hans Gruber, they don't have any motivation whatsoever, other than just the very simplistic greed. There is nothing else to it. It's very, very, very boring. But it's something that's happening quite a lot in popular fiction at the moment. It's happening in the Disney remakes. At the moment there's this real penchant for taking old Disney films, the old animated films, and making live-action versions of them. And I must say, thus far, I think it's a totally failed experiment. I mean, an abject failure. For the simple reason that this is not a creative decision. Let's get that out there for a start. It's not a creative decision. It's decided round a boardroom. It's because there is an established audience for these things. Nostalgia is huge at the moment. So that's the decision. It's like, we've got a ready-made audience. We don't need to put a lot of money or effort into it. It will sell. It will sell, and that's it. We don't even have to write a script as such, because it's there already. But worse than that, far worse than that, is that the adaptations tend to have total ignorance of what makes the original films work. If you take, for example, The Beauty and the Beast, now, for all of its problems, and yeah, it has loads of problems, it's a Disney film, of course it has loads of problems, but for that, I'm quite a big fan of the original Beauty and the Beast. I like the cartoon. I think it's very well animated. I think it's very cleverly designed. And I like the way it parodies the Disney formula, at the point where that formula was just being established. If you watch Beauty and the Beast with its predecessor, The Little Mermaid, which is the one that really established the formula and saved Disney, then the two are completely antipodean. They mirror one another to a certain degree, but they also parody one another. Take the lead characters, for example, Belle and Ariel. Ariel is a ditzy 16-year-old who falls in love, quote, with the first man she sees, and doesn't even meet him, she just sees him, and that's it, she falls in love, to the point whereby she changes herself completely. She changes everything about herself. She abandons her whole world to be with this guy she doesn't know. She's totally subservient to him. It's really quite weird. In Belle, you have the total opposite of that. The total opposite. She is this self-willed, entirely her own creature that stands in total odds with the world into which she's born, and has incredible agency over both the domestic and the fantastical elements of her world. She is the Disney princess that has agency, as opposed to Ariel, who doesn't. The same is true of the villains, the villain in Beauty and the Beast and the prince in The Little Mermaid. If you look at Gaston in The Beauty and the Beast, he's even designed to look like Eric. He's just like a big buffed up version of Eric, and he is the perfect parody of the classic Disney prince. It's quite clever. It's really cool. The live action adaptation takes these archetypes and it does this awful thing that a lot of present day storytelling does, where it feels this need to clump motivation around them. They've all got to have backstory. So Gaston, it's not that he's just an entitled, narcissistic prick anymore, who is, in terms of his aspects and his themes, opposed to the Beast and to Belle. No, we can't have that anymore. It can't work like that anymore. He's got to have this backstory about how he's a soldier and he may have PTSD and all of this crap. It's like, no. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. It does not enhance the story. It dilutes the archetypes. It dilutes the fairy tale and mythological nature of it. And it complexifies it in a way that doesn't require complexifying. But it's not just him. It's every fucking character has that. The Beast has this backstory that explains why he's such a prick. At the beginning. The sorceress that enchants him in the castle has this backstory that tells you why she does it. And it's like, why? What? I don't want to know. I don't want to know any more than I want to know why the Wicked Witch of the West is green and evil. I do not want to know. Don't get me wrong, this can work. This can be done really, really well, and it has been done really well a couple of times. A very good, like, for example, take Alice in Wonderland. And I'm not talking about the Tim Burton film. That fucking sucks. That Tim Burton film is the nadir of everything Tim Burton has ever done, I can tell you. People think that it's Mars Attacks or Planet of the Apes. No, it's that film. It's appallingly bad. But if you look at American McGee's Alice, the video game adaptation from about a decade back, that's a very clever way of taking the images and the concepts and the archetypes of a very classic story and modernizing them, or post-modernizing them rather, and turning them into something much more interesting where, yeah, there is backstory, yeah, there is motivation and reason for all of these characters, but it works. It works because it doesn't synthetically drop those motivations in just because some studio exec or some trumped up editor somewhere has said, oh, you need to do this, you need to do that. No, it works because American McGee puts a framework around the core mythology that warrants it and actually enhances their poetry and makes them something really interesting. Here, it doesn't work. It really doesn't work. Another reason they don't work is because they are designed to succeed. They are edited by test audience, that much is very clear. So the elements that would have been problematic in the originals are taken out, and all of this new stuff is added in that dilutes the entire mythology and the story and the significance and just makes it worthless. It makes it empty and hollow. It's the same problem you have with remakes. It's exactly the same problem you have with most remakes. Not all of them. Remakes can work, but people don't seem to understand, the creators of these things don't seem to understand, or they don't give a shit, that the reasons the originals were successful is because they captured the lightning in the bottle. Most people don't understand why their work becomes successful. Writers, artists, comic book writers, whatever. They don't understand why it becomes successful. What happens is they just naturally tap into a cultural zeitgeist. They do something or create something that snares in the collective imagination, and it expresses something very particular about that world, about that time, about that era, about that culture. And it's why remakes tend to fail. They tend to fail because, as I said earlier, they do not occur because people want to tell a story or because they have something to express. They tend to occur because somebody in a boardroom somewhere said, we haven't done this for a while. There's an established audience for this. Let's just knock that out, you know? It's why I'm very skeptical about them. It's why I'm very, very skeptical. Don't get me wrong, as I said, they can work. They can be, in fact, they can surpass the originals. Remakes can be absolutely stunning, but they often aren't. They often aren't. You cannot synthetically recapture that lightning in the bottle. In order for remakes to work, they need to be adapted such that they capture something new, that they express something new, not about the 1980s or the 1990s or whatever, wherever they were originally created, but about the era in which they occur now. So in order for a remake of The Beauty and the Beast to work, it has to do something that hasn't been seen before. It has to do something that hasn't been expressed before. It has to do something that's relevant to now, but it doesn't. It's just terrible. It's terrible and hollow and synthetic. And you know what? Most people can feel this, even if they can't express it. Most audiences can feel this, even if they don't know what it is that's making them uncomfortable or that's making it so that the thing is boring or offensive or doesn't work. They can feel it and they will react against it. They will react powerfully against it if they've got any sort of sensitivity, if they've got the ability to engage with this kind of material, and they'll demand better. They should demand better. They should demand better. It's really quite strange to me. Really quite weird. I don't quite know how I got here, to be honest, ladies and gents. This has been a really random, rambly one. But yeah, I've been having this experience where I don't know what is happening. It's really strange, and I must admit, I'm quite enjoying it. I'm quite enjoying it. I'm always fascinated by the vicissitudes of mind and of how mysterious one's own state of imagination and mind actually is. I don't understand why, when I close my eyes, certain images come up. I don't understand. I don't understand why they're so vivid. I don't understand why they're so strange. And I don't understand why they demand expression in the way they do. But they do, and they need to be got out. They really, really do. They absolutely demand it. For me, it's the writing. They have to be expressed in words, because it's the only way I can do it. And that results in the challenging and rather strange nature of my prose, which I've been told many times is difficult to get into, which is perfectly fine. I think that's absolutely true, and I think it's going to be true for anything I create, to be perfectly honest. It is going to be true, because what I try to do when I write is just... I want something earnest. I want something real. I don't just want to sit there and think, oh, what story shall I write today? That doesn't work for me. Or what do I need to produce for this deadline? That just does not work for me. It just doesn't. Some people can do it brilliantly. Some people can do it beautifully. They make careers out of it. I know some people who do it. Matt Shaw does it brilliantly. Duncan Ralston does it. Lex Jones does it. Laura Marrow does it. Kit Power does it. They're very, very, very good. Rich Hawkins does it. There are loads of you out there that do it really beautifully. I can't. I really, really, really can't. I'm just not very good at that. I struggle against parameter. I really, really do. When I write a story, what I'm trying to do is get something out. And what I'm trying to do is exorcise and express something really personal and very immediate. And it's what I want, you know? It's what I want, or what I'm afraid of, or what may be, or what is concerning me at the time. I mean, there are stories throughout my collections that all of them are like that. Every single bloody one of them is like that. And sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. But what I don't ever do is just sit there and just, I cannot just sit and write a story. It doesn't work. It doesn't work for me. There needs to be something there. And fortunately, because the nature of my mind or imagination, whatever those phenomena are, is they are so full of this shit. They're so there's a lot bubbling in the subconscious there. I can almost always do it. I can almost always produce something, whether it works or not, and something that expresses something very legitimate, I hope. So, at least for me, something that's legitimate for me. But this goes back to what we were talking about earlier about remakes. I find that I'm quite sensitive to stories that don't work, not because there's anything technically wrong with them, but because they are insincere. And there's a lot of that around, funnily enough. There's a lot of that around. And what does that mean, a story that's insincere? I would say it's a story that doesn't have any legitimate emotional or intellectual weight behind it. It's just an exercise in crafting the way this story works. It's like a scaffolding of a story. And from a distance, sometimes it looks like a story, but it's not. It doesn't have the engine at its core. It doesn't have the heart. It doesn't have the soul and the essence of a story. What works for me, and it's something that I think most people can sense, just like they can with cinema or video games, what really works with me is when the writer is trying to express something very heartfelt and something sincere, whether it's desire or hunger or lust or celebration or faith or whatever, it doesn't really matter. It doesn't really matter as long as it is sincere. There's more of it in cinema and television than anything else, I would argue. There's a lot of empty, hollow dreck in TV and cinema. Cinema in particular, mainstream popular cinema. There's a lot of stuff that just exists, not because it's to tell a story, but because there are studio execs who want to make money off of it, and that's it. That's the only motivation. I did probably controversial, but I'd say the entire Marvel stable the entire superhero genre exists because of that. And that, don't get me wrong, there are some superhero films that I like for whatever reason because they have good aesthetics, because there's particular performances in them that are very good. But the vast, vast, vast majority, where no matter how good they are totally hollow. There's nothing behind them. There's no weight. They're there to flashbang wallop, to sort of wow you with their spectacle, which is fine. In a visual medium like cinema, that's fine. There's an audience for that. But don't ever come to me pretending there's any legitimate storytelling there, because there isn't. They are pretty much all the same, especially the origin stories. If you look at like the origin story of Doctor Strange, if you look at the myriad Spider-Man origin stories, if you look at the Iron Man film, if you look at the first Thor film, when you rip them down to their skeletons, they're the same stories. They're exactly the same story, the same beats, the same notes, the same emotions. They've just been cladded in something slightly different, that's all. And as I said, don't get me wrong, there's nothing wrong with liking those films for what they are, for the spectacle of them, because they can be very impressive, they can be very beautiful even. There's images in Doctor Strange, for example, that are taken almost verbatim from Inception, but which work really well. I like the conception of the way magic looks in Doctor Strange. I think it's really quite cool. But don't ever try to kid me into thinking there's a story there, because there ain't. There isn't, beyond the sort of prescribed rote what we already know. Those origin superhero films could just be a trailer. They could be just 5 minutes of these beats that we all know are in them and that we all recognize, because that's what they are, by and large. It's all they ever are. What I'm sincerely hoping for very soon with regards to the superhero films is that bubble bursts, and what we start to get are legitimate parodies of that formula. And no, we haven't really had them yet. Kick-Ass, kind of. I suppose the first Kick-Ass film kind of goes there to a certain degree, but it's still actually following the beats that it's parodying within its own mythos. I'm talking about a proper parody, and no, Deadpool does not count. Deadpool is not a parody of superhero films. It is a superhero film. It can be funny, it has all of the beats, and it has the imagery, but it's not a parody of superhero films at all. It's just a superhero film with a superhero who is aware of the fact that he's a superhero, and is kind of foul-mouthed, and that's it. But yeah, what I mean when I say insincere storytelling is that it's the superhero films. It's the films that only exist because someone somewhere has read an algorithm that says that these kinds of films do well at this time of year. Like, for example, what we're getting now is the Oscar bait films. You know what I mean by this? The Oscar porn. There's always Oscar porn films around this time. We've got like Tolkien, which looks awful. It looks atrocious. We've got what's the other one? We had what was it? Bohemian Rhapsody, which was another one. They are always biographies or biopics. There's the Elton John one coming up. They all come up around this time of year, because they are Oscar bait. There is those stories, those films, despite their pretense to being heartfelt human dramas, are as formulaic and as hollow and as empty as any superhero film. They will pretend not to be. They will pretend that they're highbrow and that they're intellectual and there's something complex. They're not. They're not. They are hagiographies. And they are as coded and as formulaic as any horror film, fantasy, sci-fi, or superhero film. Absolutely they are. And very often they are totally hollow. They are dreck. They are absolute dreck. There are very few I can think of that are any bloody good. I'm struggling. I'm really struggling to think of one. But that's what I mean by hollow storytelling. You get it a lot from writers who have been around a long time and who consistently publish like year on year on year on year. You get this stalling happening where beloved franchises start to become empty and hollow. You start to get... I do think there is this burnout thing that happens where it's difficult to keep expressing something new or something novel you start to just keep running your wheels basically in the sludge, or you get into that horrible place where you don't feel it anymore. You don't feel what you're doing anymore, and therefore it's just the next book from bestseller, blah 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 blah. Some people start out like that. Dan Brown started out like that. Dan Brown's books are probably the best examples of hollow fiction you'll ever find. You will ever find. There is nothing legitimate in them. In Dan Brown's books, there is nothing that the man is trying to express as a writer other than this is a controversy that I've gotten a hold of. I can make money off of it. That's all it is. And as a result, the stories are awful. They're god awful. I will never understand. Actually, I do. That's facetious. I do understand why they're popular, and it's kind of insulting in a way because there is a lowest common denominator element to them. They're bad fiction. They're badly written. They're badly told in terms of their storytelling. The characters are poorly presented, and they're so formulaic. They're so formulaic. If you read any of Dan Brown's stories, here's the formula: exposition, running, exposition, running, exposition, running, exposition, running, climax, end. That's the formula of every single Dan Brown story. And they all follow those beats, every single one of them. And it's awful. It's god awful. His stories are just exposition. That's it. It's characters standing around in between bits of running away, talking about the plot and the back mythology. That's all it is. It should not work. It should not work. It should be death. But it's not for some reason. People flock to it, and I for the life of me, I don't know why. But then again, the same is true of crap like 50 Shades of Grey, isn't it? 50 Shades of Grey, which is purported to be an erotic thriller. Now, erotic fiction should be some of the most visceral and emotional out there, and it often is. Erotic fiction can be wonderful, but that crap, I just don't even know what to say. And the fact that so many people take that as being the measure of erotic fiction now, wow, that hurts. It really does. As someone who actually really rather likes erotic fiction, that hurts. Because it's not, by any measure, it's not good, it's not erotic, it's badly written. And not only that, it's borderline a celebration of abuse. I mean, there are elements in it that are very rapine and very unpleasant. It's really, 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 really hollow and bad. But the funny thing about fiction, certainly written fiction, is something can be technically bad, and yet if it's got that sincerity and that fidelity behind it, it can still have strength. A really good, we keep coming back to him on this podcast, but H.P. Lovecraft. H.P. Lovecraft was not always a good writer. In fact, it's arguable that he was not often a good writer. A lot of his prose is risible. A lot of his prose is really risible, and as someone who actually really loves his stories, it's kind of okay to say that. It's okay to acknowledge that the prose is often risible. The thing that makes his stories risible is that he is trying so earnestly to reach for the indescribable, to describe that thing which is beyond human comprehension, beyond human emotional reaction, that is so powerful and so outre that he can't even express it in his prose. And as a result, it often comes off as overly verbose, as too literary, as too many adjectives all clumped up together. That is often the case, and they are risible aspects, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter because there is this genuine emotion and desire behind his writing. He is genuinely trying to reach for that holy grail. He doesn't want to terrify you. He wants to disturb you. He wants you to acknowledge the cosmic lunacy and chaos of our being and to be undone by it. That's what he's trying to do with his work. And, I'm kind of with him. I would love to do that. If there's a horrible, horrible, horrible part of me that says, if I heard somehow that someone was, say, driven mad by my fiction or had to be, I don't know, hospitalized because they read it, there's a horrible part of me that would be very pleased. Very pleased, because I feel as though it would be doing its job. But no, emotion is key there. It really is genuine desire to do something, to set up territory in other people's minds and to change them somehow, to wreak havoc, to undo their topography, and to erect your own temples and cathedra, to send your own temporal phenomena raging across them. That's what expression is. That's what writing is. That's what art is. That's what it should want to do. But hollow fiction doesn't want to do that. Hollow fiction or art doesn't want to do that. It just wants to exist for its own sake and to give you and to get you to empty your wallets. That's basically it. That's all it's there for. But yes, I don't know how I got there from what I was talking about, but this strange phenomena where there are parts of my own mind that are activating for whatever reason and dredging up stuff that's very deep, that's like from childhood. It's really weird. It's really quite a strange experience, but one I'm actually really enjoying. It's actually spurred me to go and find these artifacts again and actually have a look at them. Like I said, I actually went and found the Ewoks cartoon on YouTube, and it's better than it has any right to be. That's not to say it's good. It's just to say that it's a better work than something as bizarre as a spin-off as it is should be. It's certainly better than a lot of the Star Wars spin-offs. For example, that awful holiday special. Certainly a lot better than that. But what I found fascinating about it are the scenes and the images and the sound cues that, because I experienced it so young, are indelibly embedded in my subconscious, to the point whereby experiencing them sort of catapults you back. There was one episode I was watching that was insane, absolutely insane. It's an episode that the reason it was insane is not because of the episode, but because I remember it somehow catapulted me back to being like 5 or 6 and of arriving home from school at like 3:20 in the afternoon, getting a plastic mug filled with fizzy orange drink and sitting and watching it on CBBC. Very specific, very clear in my mind, which probably means the memory is somewhat false, but it's really strange. I find that fascinating, absolutely fascinating. Anyway, I know this wasn't the one that I said I was going to do. I am still going to do the one about Harry Potter and magic, and I'm still going to do the one about South Korean and Japanese and Chinese horror. I'm still going to do all of those. Those are in the pipeline. This was just an impromptu ramble, really. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed it or got something out of it. And until next time, ladies and gents.